the unity prayer. The unity prayer asks for the Lord to be one with us, and if that is true, then one of us has got to die, right? And one of the things that I love about a lot of priests that we work through is I like how Jesus shines through their filter. And there was a question that I received last night about what was all this talk about marriage? Why did we go through the whole divorce story and into our marriage, and how does this have to do with me? And that's a fair question. And that's a good question, because asking you shall receive, seeking you shall find, knocking the door shall open. Usually, when we grow up with a plan to our lives and what we think we have a conception of what we think are an ideology or an ideal that's embedded in us of what a perfect marriage is, what a perfect life is, what a perfect childhood is. And when it doesn't add up to that ideal, we figure that something's wrong. The hard thing is to understand that our ideal is imperfect according to God's perspective. So God looks at the big picture. When he looks at you, he looks at the generation before you, where you are, how you cope with what you understand, and he judges your heart. So really we don't have we have but our intentions, because we literally can't do anything without the grace of God. There's nothing that can be done without God's wonderful grace. So God's judging us on our intentions of what, and he knows how much strength we have, he knows how much will, he knows how much understanding, and he gives us a lot of grace. In fact, none of us have suffered the consequences due to our sin. No matter how you can't outpay him, you can't outdo God, you can't outsuffer God. None of us suffer what we deserve. I know I for certainly, I lived a rebellious teenage life. There are many opportunities I could have been in jail, for stupid stuff that I did when I was 18. And God, in his mercy, didn't allow me to suffer what I deserved. And we complain sometimes that life isn't fair, and that is a true statement. Life is not fair. We just have to look at the cross to know that that was not fair for Jesus to suffer what he did, because he was without sin. He suffered for us. And he shows us the way. So when we're talking about his radical faith, it's a little scary. It's a little scary, but that's where we're going. We're actually going to a mystical marriage. The wedding feast of the Lamb. We are all being wooed and pursued by the Lord for this great union, this marriage, to be one with God, and we don't really know what that entails. And in fact, it's a little bit too radical, a little bit too scary to even ponder on. As a man, I met a lot of single women who are like, oh, I would love to be married to Jesus instead of my stupid husband. And us men were like, yeah, Jesus, I love you, bro, but I can't really. Marriage is a little bit too. I don't get that. I'm a man. I don't know how I'm going to marry Jesus. I have some hesitation, and God gets that. God gets our understanding, and he loves us through it where we're at. But it's never going to be how you think it's supposed to be. So your holiness, how people respond to you, making sacrifices for them and loving them, you're always going to be continually disappointed in this life because you're not God. We have a limited perception of what is going on. It looks a certain way, and it never plays out like you have to. And a lot of times you're in the waiting. You're waiting on the Lord because you have this concept that things are supposed to happen. And we're waiting on the Lord when the game is already on. The game is already on. You're already in the game, of this rescue mission. And a lot of us feel that there is something we have to do. And if we're not doing something, we could miss the boat. We're going to miss the boat. Did you ever hear about that person? Their flood was coming, and they said, I'm not gonna worry because Jesus has got me. And then Jesus says several times, several cars, and say, come on, get on the car, there's a flood. No, I'm gonna wait for Jesus. Come on, there's a bus. No, I'm gonna wait for Jesus. The flood comes up to the house, the guy's on the road. They said over a boat. No, I'm gonna wait for Jesus. And then the helicopter comes. And it's this your last chance. He goes, no, I have faith, I'm going to wait for Jesus. And then the person dies in the flood, goes to heaven, and says, where were you? And Jesus said, I sent you a car, a bus, a boat, and a helicopter. But you didn't save me. The end of that story is that person is still being saved because you are eternal being. So even if you don't get it, even if you miss the boat, you miss the car, you miss the goat, you are still being saved. So this person who didn't make it, who is dead, is at the gates of heaven, has still an opportunity in purgatory to make up for what he missed. You are not going to miss the boat if you, in your intention, you choose God, but you don't get it. He knows you don't get it, and He's patient, He's kind, He's merciful. He gets you more than you get you. So if we don't die to our own understanding of love and radical love and what we need and what we don't need, and abandon all our preconceptions, He's still going to pursue us. Until we get it, it comes back to the test. What was the test? Joy and I, we gave the catechism. We were doing catechism. We gave the test to the kids. Everyone took the test and then they failed. And then we had the test again. And everyone, maybe 1/3 got it, then half got it, right? We kept on taking the test, and then it was just 5 people didn't get it, so everybody helped those 5 people out. You're the 5 people. We have to help our brothers and sisters pass this test. The test of love. Now the problem that we're going to have, and this is it. When I fell in love with Joy after my first marriage fell apart, it was really easy to love her. She was ready to receive love. I was ready to receive love. That was a no-brainer. It was easy. You all have people that you love. Raise your hand if you love someone. Okay, now raise both hands if they love you back. Okay. That's easy. It's easy to love someone who loves you. There's no challenge there, Jesus says. But who does Jesus love? He loves us while we're still sinners. He loves us while we're persecuting Him. He loves us when we call Him names and say that He's doing His works through demons. He loves us. He loves the Pharisees, enough to give them the truth anyways. He loves the Pharisees. He came for them. He came for the people who whipped Him. That is radical. And this is the challenge. We are our own worst enemy. There is no gain to love someone who loves you, but it's everything to love someone who is your enemy. And if there were ever anything that we had any power over, would be to show mercy to our enemies, the people who persecute us, the people who call us crazy, radical Catholics, the people who do not honor us, that disrespect us, the people who have been unfaithful to us, the people that only think of themselves are the ones that we have to be Jesus to. And we're like, wait a minute. Radical love means I have to die to myself and love the people who hate me. Love the people who persecute me. How am I able to do that? And brothers and sisters, I want to tell you that it is impossible for you to do that on your own. Inside every one of us, we have this self-preserving mechanism that says, I need boundaries here. And yet Jesus is showing us his heart is outside his chest. And it's full of thorns. And he's asking us to go down a road that is literally impossible for us to take and still live. Still have my dignity, to still have my personhood when I'm with someone who hates me. But this is where all the miracles happen. This is what we ask our Lord, forgive me as I forgive others. And he holds that to us. How am I going to have radical love? How am I going to enter into heaven? Literally impossible for you. So how do we get past that? Does anybody know the greatest gift you can give Jesus? Somebody wave back if I get it. It's tough. It's okay. There's a lot of gifts, there's a lot of sacrifices, there's a lot of offerings you can give Jesus. Right? But the greatest gift that you can give the Lord is your free will. It's the fiat of Mary. It's to be at the foot of the cross, the most powerful places. Not my will alone, Lord, but your will be done. It's a denial of ourselves. And it's impossible for us to do this. When we think our life are not going as planned, the Lord's doing something in our life that we can't understand. Today I wanted to be here on time, but that was taken from me. It's not part of my will. Things happen. They go outside of your control. You want to blame yourself. You want to blame others. You want to make excuses, but God knew I was going to be late. There was something that was happening, and I didn't have a full perspective of what was going on. I used to think that if I was just a good enough Catholic, I would have waited in the beginning. I wouldn't have forced my first marriage. I would have eventually met Joy, and all our children would be half Irish and half Filipino. If I was just good. I think a lot of us are afraid to make mistakes, and it paralyzes us. But I want to say this. The mistakes that we make are the building blocks of us to understand who God is and who we are and how we are lacking. So what he does is he allows us to become that fertile soil. We have to be tilled. Our ideas have to be broken up. Our understandings, our concepts, it needs to rain on us. Manure has to penetrate our field. That's all the dirt and the junk in life, the rock and the mistreating. Our ship has to be open, empty, totally empty. You know, it was not a mistake that Peter could not catch any fish all night long. That was the plan. He wasn't a bad fisherman. He wasn't doing something right or wrong. He was where he was supposed to be, unable to provide. And if he didn't have that empty boat, he wouldn't have recognized the miracle of the fish. What did he do? He realized that there is no way that could have happened without the help of God. And unfortunately, that's where God is leading all of us, to this complete abandonment of ourselves, because our plans will not work. And he allows us to go down roads of perdition, if that's what it takes, to prove to us that we have no idea what we want, that we have no idea of what's good for us, that we are so sure that the road that we chose for ourselves is not the road to heaven, and that I can't do anything without it. The complete abandonment of your plan is where God needs you to be, so He can move you into a radical position, so He can show you who He is. And if you haven't been completely there yet, and you're still fighting your way, and you got your own ideas, and this is the way it's going to be, that's okay. Sometimes you gotta go down that road. You gotta know what evil tastes like. Okay. But you can't change someone. God doesn't even allow Himself to change people. I mean, if this was my will, I'd grab you all, hog-tie you, and make you convert to Jesus and baptize all of you today. And I'd shove you into the confessional until you confessed all your sins. And then I would shove the Eucharist down your throat. I'm not Jesus, thank God. I'm not Jesus. I'm not going to do that. But the Lord is not worried about your conversion. He's patient. He's kind. And He allows really bad things to happen that look like punishments, but they're not. They're opportunities. We cry out, the Lord is like, Lord, this is like Sodom and Gomorrah. He says, I know. That's why I need you to help me love them. Love is not forced. In America, we had this day in September called 9/11, where supposed terrorists came in and threw their planes into some very big, important buildings. And a lot of people died. And right after that happened, the churches were packed. Does anybody know how long they were packed? 2 weeks. There wasn't a spot open in the church for 2 weeks. Fear does not make people love God. God does not want people to come because of fear. Right? His plan exceeds far beyond fear. He doesn't need fear, but people were going to church because they were afraid. Right? Love, on the other hand, that's, so when you look at the world, you know, one time I did a Flint of Love conference, some state, and I had a sword in me. It was a big wooden sword. It had St. Michael on it, Virgin Mary, and I was supposed to be talking about spiritual warfare. And I knelt down, and my opening line was, God needs warriors, right? And God corrected me just as I spoke into the microphone. And He says, my son, I don't need warriors. I need lovers. I need lovers. What is God calling us to do? Every single one of us has an impartation, an imprint, a fingerprint, if you will, of God inside each one. He resides in us. And outside of the Holy Eucharist, the closest thing that we will encounter to God is another person, an eternal being that God resides in. God's hiding in. God's working with and working through. And He wants all of us. So our challenge is to love our enemies as ourselves. How do I love my neighbor? Do I even love myself? Or am I mad at myself? Am I disgusted with myself? God is not disgusted with you. He gets you. There are things and traits and triggers that are in you that only God understands. did you allow me to do that? And it was that so that I would love her. The one who betrayed me, that I would petition God for her. God puts certain people in your life that without your prayers would be doomed to hell. Moses was chosen to lead the people out of Egypt, right? God gave him very specific instructions. Tell Pharaoh this, tell Pharaoh that. And he had to bring these people from Egypt to the Promised Land. And technically this is a 2-week walk. A 2-week walk. And the Israelites, their trail went for miles and miles and miles. These people. They were saved. But they didn't feel saved. They were hungry and they were fed, but they didn't feel fed. They wanted special food. God gave them special food. But they didn't feel special. Right? They started to crave what they were missing out in Egypt. But they were set free. But it didn't feel free. And they grumbled and they complained. Do you see what's going on? How we are the Israelites? Do you see how this is continuing on, one story after another? They get saved and then they have spiritual amnesia and we start to grumble about our situation. The trip through the desert was their purification. And they needed this so badly because their desires were off. Now you can call it Egypt. What I call it now is Hollywood. Right? Same demon, different name. Right? Oh, I wish I was a movie star. I wish I was a rock star. I wish I was a millionaire. If I was a millionaire, and even though you might be poor, you can still worship things. Because my desires are off. I'm in wrong praise. And God sees it from afar. He sees all of our hearts. Right? So we come and we ask God, but we're not being honest that maybe our hearts need to be purified. So all of Egypt was tainted with this sin. A lot of like how the people are tainted with the sin of today's Sodom and Gomorrah. And that's what I'm going to call it. I'm not going to sugarcoat it. We're actually worse off than Sodom and Gomorrah because of the internet and how fast we can send evil through the airwaves. We're actually worse than Sodom and Gomorrah. In fact, we're so bad, if God doesn't do some kind of chastisement soon, we got to write a big letter of apology to Sodom and Gomorrah because we're way worse. But there's no difference between Egypt and Sodom and Gomorrah. They were worshiping false gods. For them to be free, completely free, they needed to go through their own chastisement. They needed to go through their own purification. So when they came to the Promised Land, they would be able to receive it. So our whole problem is really not that God has blocked us or we're blocked from God. It's us being able to receive the Lord. It's receptivity. To get to that radical position where we abandon ourselves to the world, if we're so attached to the world, we can't receive because we're hanging on to a desire that's not of God. Or a desire that's been perverted. Somewhere in there, God is purifying the desires of Egypt. He's purifying us. So it happens to everyone. Even Jesus. When Saint John the Baptist baptized Jesus, the Holy Spirit came down as a dove. You heard God's voice, said, "This is my son." What happens next? Jesus goes into the desert. 40-day fast in the desert where he's tested. Okay? He goes first to show us the way. Okay? He was tested and he did not sin. Us, we're tested and we sin a whole lot. So this 40-year walk through the desert was to purify the people of the desires, so they were grateful for the manna. So they were grateful for the fowl at night. So they were grateful that they had a tent. So they were grateful that they won the war against the enemies that came against them. And they were grateful for the little miracles of God because now they're purified. Right? And a lot of them died through that 40 years. A lot of the old people died, and the children never knew of this false god named Hollywood. They don't know what that was, but they were grateful when they entered into the promised land. And then Moses was being purified too. You know, Moses' first part of his journey was a continual complaint to God. Your people, your people, your people. You know what they did? You know what they did? And he would continually complain to God about how disrespectful, how unfaithful, how terrible the people of Israel were. And what did God say to him? He said, you know, you're right. Now, God does not lie. So Moses had a right complaint. He was accurate, you're right. I'm going to wipe them out. And then Moses said, what? You're gonna wipe them out? And he goes, and then I'm going to make you. I'm going to start with you. Now God's saying this, he's not bluffing. He did this before with Noah. He's not bluffing. He did this with Sodom and Gomorrah. And Moses took a good look at himself and had an illumination of conscience. I'm not all I'm cracked up to be. If they failed, I know how weak I am. And God could wipe me out too. And then there was a pivotal point where Moses turned from complaining and griping and switched his direction around and started to defend the people of God, who were his enemies just 5 minutes before, and said, but Lord, these are your people. Remember, your people do this, your people do, but these are your people. What would they say that the great God, the merciful God, would bring these people just to die in the desert, and he becomes the priest? Because that's what our priest does for us. He takes the people of God who are grumbling and complaining, and he turns and he intercedes for his enemies, the people that come against him. And I'm telling you, it's hard to be a priest. We put them on this high pedestal, right up next to Jesus. And at the beginning of any time you ever met a priest, oh man, he's holy, he's a good guy, he's this and he's this, and he has one bad day and he farts, and then he's down here. Right? And then he's a bad priest. It's either extreme. We are a hard sheep to steer. We grumble at everything because of our misconceptions, our limited point of view. It's not fair, it's not fair, it's not fair. I'm waiting, I can't feel God, I don't love God. I don't love God enough, I'm not a good person. Over and over and over again. And so the answer, brothers and sisters, is the chastisement, is the answer, is the walk through the desert, the purification of me. The death of me is the answer. So if this world is going to get fixed by Jesus, it needs medicine because it's sick. And the medicine is the chastisement. We got to go without. We got to be purified away from Hollywood, away from the internet, away from these things that take us away from God that are false, the untruth. And we got to love our enemy. We got to find Jesus in the one that persecutes us. That's the only way. And for that to happen, I gotta die. I gotta love my ex-wife. I gotta pray for her. Am I there yet? No, that is hard. I am not there yet. Do I pray for my enemy like I pray for myself? Because myself, I pray with supplications and fasting, and I get on my knees and I cry to the Lord, Lord, help me, help me, help me. We need this and we need that. And then when I pray for my ex-wife, and pray for my ex-wife. Yeah, God bless her. That's it. I'm not doing what Jesus did. So I need more purification. And then I grumble against the purification and I'm stuck. So when you're going through your 40-day desert or your purification or your chastisement or your loss of your job or your broken relationship or whatever God's using to purify you right now, we have to be honest that there is a free will in this. And I don't have to be in the desert for 40 years because Christ has died for us. He has become every disease for us. He has become sin for us. And I'm not accessing that. How do I access this? How do I become radical? How do I get there? Okay, now I know I'm being purified and I have to go through this desert to get to the promised land. How do I get to the promised land sooner? Can I ask that? Is that okay? Or am I being selfish? Okay, you gotta walk that through. Is it okay to ask God big things? Yes, we see that. We see that in the Garden of Gethsemane when Jesus says, Father, you can do all things, and if you can remove this cup from me, you can do this. You can do this. It was okay for Jesus to ask his Father to remove the cup, and it's okay for you to ask the Lord to get me through this trial, to get me unstuck, to get me to the point where I can radically love my enemies so I can be united with you. It is okay. Now I'm going to give you the secret. We are going to stay in the desert for as long as it takes. But these three things have to happen. And if you have anything that you take away from anything that I've said, you write down these three things. Because until those three things happen, you're not getting out of your situation. Because the situation you're in is a purification of your soul, so you die and you can accept Jesus in a radical way in your life. It'll change everything. It'll make you apostles. It'll make you have gifts. It'll make you prophesize. It'll make you heal people. It'll make you an evangelist. It'll make you a poet, a singer, a priest, a nun, a married person. It'll help you accept your vocation, but you're not getting out of the desert until these three things are completed. So we're going to have a coffee break. And after coffee, I will let you know what those three are.